Slice the Podcast is brought to you by VegaLend, a different way to get a mortgage. VegaLend provides insight and advice so you can make informed decisions for the future of your family. Welcome to Slice, Property Made Possible. We're a platform on a mission to reduce barriers to home ownership. This podcast is a safe space for our community to learn together and build the confidence required to start on their property journey. When you're ready to start, head along to slicetobuy.com and sign up for your free dashboard.
Well, welcome back everyone. We're up to episode 3 and how much do I need? So we're going to talk about those big fat deposits you need to buy your first property. So let's dive in with you, Moss. So what did you look at first in terms of getting your deposit together? How did that work for you?
Yeah, so I think this is an obvious place to start, but definitely the Kiwisaver was key for me. Having that kind of mandated by government meant that I did have a bit of money there, but I think it's looking at, do you have Kiwisaver? Do you have any savings? What can you pull together as well? Like I even pulled together some money between making the offer and buying the first home. I was like, I can sort of stretch myself to save this extra, couple of grand between that period. So absolutely, what can you scrape together? Can you get some support from your parents? There is something that I know a lot of people look to, which is the Home Start Grant, and there are a few conditions you have to meet. I didn't actually meet it myself, but if you are interested in that grant, you have to be 18, you have to have earned less than the income cap in the last 12 months, and I'll go into that shortly. Sure. You have to not have purchased a property before or not currently own a property, so it has to be your first home. Yeah. It doesn't include ownership of multi-land because obviously that's kind of often owned in trust and as part of your tribe. And then you have to have been contributing the minimum to Kiwisaver for a period of 3 years. So that one's quite key. Right. And you also have to be purchasing a property that is actually within the regional price cap. So you kind of can't be a big shooter buying like a 1.5 house won't cut the mustard. So it's definitely looking at those people in a certain bracket, and if you can fit into that, that's great. And then with most grants, not grants, even just loans or lending, you're expected to live in that property for 6 months, but in particular with the first home, the starter's grant.
Awesome. So what about your income and like how much you earn? How does that come into play in terms of
Yeah, so it's about $95,000 or less before tax. So that's kind of got to be your annual max of $95,000 if you're buying as an individual. If you're buying with dependents, it's $150,000, or if you're buying with a partner, it's $150,000 before tax as well, regardless of kind of how many kids or dependents, whether that's a parent, a child, or whatever you have.
Perfect.
What about you, DJ? Back to you? What about you and your deposit and getting that together?
Yeah, so it always depends obviously on what properties you're looking at and what your price range is, right? But you kind of have a baseline understanding what your deposit is. So like I said for the first episode, I was a very rigorous saver, so I did save the majority of the amount that I needed. And that accounted for 70 and 80% of the deposit. But then I did go, to the bank of mum and dad and get a little help, which essentially did work like a second mortgage in my case, because it wasn't just free money, though it did help. It was that essential buffer, right, to actually get to that number you needed for that 20% deposit, which was my case.
Because you could get in for 10% for a period of time, although that's now a little bit more challenging. But even so, that comes with kind of an extra cost because the kind of rates that you're offered aren't so good. Similar for me actually, although less rigorous saver. It's something that I've learnt later, which I think we should talk about this on an episode at one stage, but my focus has been more on earning and my capacity to earn, and I think it's actually probably a valid strategy both ways, but probably a combination of both is the ideal, and I'm kind of trying to push into how I can understand how much I'm spending and how much I'm saving. But that was not something that, this is oh gosh, I'm like, it's got to be careful. That's not something that I maybe learnt so much about or was taught. Not to say that I think my mum in particular was actually quite, but you only have so much to save. So maybe that's where I learnt on the other line of that. It's like, even if you're a great saver, if you don't have the earning capacity, it doesn't really matter. So those are two different kind of ways that we've come to the same, I guess, outcome. But maybe we'll touch on that a little bit in another episode. I think the next thing to consider as well, though, is actually, as we're talking about those ingoings and outgoings, is before you even discuss with the broker and move into that pre-approval phase, which will be a following episode, is how much do you have coming in? So that is kind of my strategy, is to increase that amount, and how much do you have going out, which is sort of your strategy around, how much you're spending and minimizing that and saving as much as you can. So I think it's a natural kind of tension between those two things, but both of those elements need to be explored and understood. So I think a really good thing to do is break down, what the cost of those loan repayments might be, and you can do that on the Slice website under the repayments calculator. But the cool thing about our calculator as well is it does set out based on, if you're buying just by yourself or you're buying with 2 people, 3 people, you can actually see based on, a different interest rate what those payments will look like. And you can also compare that to what your rental payments look like, which is interesting because we're seeing sort of those rent prices increasing. And, how much more is it to put that money towards a mortgage, which, is an asset that might make you money over time, as opposed to rent that's obviously, a need, but not necessarily an investment.
Awesome. So at this point, you might consider going in with someone else. That's kind of the point I keep hearing you driving, even with the platform, right? Like checking what the cost would be if you went in with someone else. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
So I think we both kind of touched on that as well, which is that once you're kind of starting to look at those outgoings and your incoming, so how much are you earning, and you can check that out on, I just use payee.net.nz, but just Google it to work out what you're actually getting coming in once you've paid for tax, your student loan, or any other costs, and download some spreadsheets from your bank accounts. Take a look through that, understand what you're spending on a monthly basis, and then work out how much you might be able to borrow, and then consider whether or not that's going to be enough. So if that is enough, then you might be lucky enough to buy by yourself, but for most people it's not enough, and that's where DJ and I have already spoken about us actually getting some support from a parent, and that being kind of our step onto the ladder and our first step. And we're probably quite lucky in our situation in that,
very lucky.
It being a parent means as well that sometimes there's not an expectation for them to own the property or live in the property, but there's so many different dynamics. Like if you want to buy with a friend or a sibling or what have you, whatever you have available to, it can become a lot more achievable. And in the next episode we'll go into some of those opportunities as well,
different
like around
arrangements, right?
Around whether it's a friend or a parent or whatever it may be. But ultimately, once you've taken a look at, okay, I'm spending this much per month and I'm receiving this much income from, my job or my shares and whatever that looks like, then it comes the question of, okay, if looking on the Slice repayments calculator, it costs $380 per week to repay the loan. Do I feasibly, including my rent payments though, have enough to pay that? And that $300 amount, though, by the way, is quite a kind one. It's normally when you've gone in with someone else that you can do that one. If you're purchasing by yourself, you're moving into like $1,500 a week. So that's where all of a sudden it becomes very clear that your options for a lot of us might not be to go into that transaction by yourself.
Right.
But of course you can explore renting out the property and things like that. But there's two things that sort of push you into thinking about fractional ownership or buying with others, and that is one, the deposit, which we both had help with. And mine was actually limited guarantee, not cash from a parent, but whatever that arrangement is, that's kind of step one. And step two is, can you afford the repayment? So even if you have the full deposit, which my partner did have, can you afford to service the loan? And when you go into our repayment calculator and see that it's, $1,400 a week or a fortnight or whatever it is, you'll either say, based on my finances, yes,
Your
or,
income, yeah.
or no. And a lot of the time, no. And that's where you kind of have to start exploring those opportunities.
So just going back to another really important point, right? Like, it's not like an elephant in the room, but you were talking about like ways to, I guess, up level your chances in terms of your purchasing power, which comes hand in hand with like the arrangements you have with other people to purchase.
Yeah.
So for example, like, being able to purchase with friends, like multiple people going in. Like, can you expand a little bit more in terms of, what the options
absolutely. So I think the thing is with home ownership is we have this expectation that it's going to be really linear. Like, you're going to buy by yourself and then you're going to live in that home by yourself, and that's what it's going to be like. And maybe in the 1920s, but no longer. So I think so now I think it's about understanding first what options are available to you. And if that is available to you, then congratulations, you're in the top 1% and then some. But like for the majority, it's not an option, and you do have to find different ways. And this is the whole purpose of this podcast. At the end of the day, comes back to educating people and providing them an understanding of what options are actually available to them. Because people just feel that housing's not even an option. It's not affordable. You can't do it. And I don't blame them. Like, without shared home ownership or buying with someone else, I would have felt that, it's a long way off. And that's where I think you have to make a decision. Are you willing to, think about what might work and take an alternative route in today so that you can one day own by yourself? Or do you want to wait and hopefully earn enough money to own by yourself, at which point property has also been increasing in value, obviously not immediately or right now, but over the long term. So your purchasing power you're really you're running uphill with it. But when you combine resources, you actually get in at a level like where you're purchasing an $800,000 or $500,000 property, and then you get to have that property move with the market. So you get to see, your property and that equity uplift over time, and therefore $500,000 today becomes $1 million in 10 years, becomes $500,000 between, for you and for the other co-owner if we bought together. So we might put in X, get a $500,000 house, and then in 5 to 10 years have our own houses. But and that's actually a really easy journey, or can be. It can be a lot quicker than sort of 10 years. With my mum, she leveraged me in using her property, and we'll talk about guarantees in a different episode, but that meant that actually I was able to get in the market, and because I timed the market quite well, after a year I released that guarantee and I did own that property by myself. But you have to actually consider, what's your entry point. You either need, a couple of $100,000 or whatever it might be in a deposit. And then you also need to be able to service that. So either by renting or by paying for that loan with someone else. So whether it's a partner, a parent, or a friend or whatever, all of a sudden sharing that cost means that property becomes accessible for you today, and you can benefit in 5 to 10 years time, or even sooner. It just depends on the market. But you no longer need 120 grand, you need 60 grand, or if there's 4 of you, you need 30 grand. So like, if you have 30 grand right now, property's an option for you, but it has to be, you have to take a strategy. You have to go
change your mindset.
Change your mindset, understand what your options are. And that's why, like, getting familiar with your finances is the next step as we move through this podcast. And then it's very much thinking about, okay, well, when do I want to achieve this goal? And the sooner you get into property, the better. Everybody says that, whatever side you're on. So
fortunately, if you're investing. But
so how can you get in sooner? And that's where ultimately, we've both had success by going in with other people. And a lot of people, when I started this platform, asked me, and they were sort of investors and people that were used to traditional property. But, how big is the market for people buying with other people? And I'd say back, well, 90% of people, because you buy with your
Wow.
partner most of the time when you're
Yeah.
buying property, and that's still a form of shared property. Like, at the end of the day, anyone buying property is normally buying with someone else, whether it's a partner, a parent, a
Parent
friend.
helping.
Like, that is, a lot of the time it's the partner. But we're also seeing relationships look different nowadays. So you're actually starting a relationship later. You know, we're all very aware of divorce rates, and we want to manage that differently. So that's where the platform
Another
kicks
very
in.
important point, like your due diligence past buying the house, right? Like understanding what that looks like when you go in from a relationship perspective. So that'll be interesting to hear more about.
And so we'll be moving into the next episode soon as well, which is actually focused on the benefits of going in with others. So it's kind of an extension of where we sort of ended today, but ultimately, you look at your finances, you understand your outgoings and your ingoings, as we've discussed today, and what your ability is to purchase a property. And then you kind of have to begin considering those alternatives if you know, for the majority, if you want to get in sooner and you want to get on that investment journey.
Strategy. Yeah.
Cool.
Awesome.
So, next time we'll be joining again to go in on the benefits of going in with others, which, super excited for. And we'll get into a bit more detail around our personal experiences as well.
Gonna get real deep. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for joining our community. Buying property isn't easy, but listening in will get you one step closer on your journey. Please leave an Apple or Spotify review and provide feedback so we can improve your experience. Join our Facebook group, A Safe Space to Learn Together, or follow us on Instagram at @slicetobuy. If you have any questions or topics you would like us to touch on, you can email us at hello@slicetobuy.com. A quick reminder, Slice the podcast does not provide personalised investment advice. We are not acting as financial advisors or taking into account your circumstances. To get personalised advice, join us at slicetobuy.com and engage with our partners who can act as your financial advisor or lawyer and support you with your specific needs.